To order. A roll call determination of quorum.
All right. Tamara Banks.
Here.
Ruby Bravo.
Here.
Joe Brito. Justin Chenault. Rupert Farley.
Here.
Denise Flatley. Robert Fogg.
Here.
Lynn Goldsmith.
Here.
Larry Gross. Yolanda Hipsky.
Here.
Michael Hoyt. Cassandra, is it your group?
Yeah.
Okay. Nicholas Watnowski.
Here.
David McLaughlin.
Here.
Kim Progue. James Powell. Matt Rowe. Rodney Thomas. Al Watkins.
Yes, here.
Clinton Wells.
Here.
Timothy Welsh.
Here.
Kevin Wilkinson. Here. We have four.
Excellent. All right, next item on the agenda, approval of the agenda. Oh, yeah, approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion? Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, agenda is approved. Number 4, approval of the
This was a staff error. We've got to link it in the agenda package. If you printed it out on a table that to the next meeting, it goes sort of.
Does that do? I mean, I'll ask for a motion, and if someone objects, I'll hear an objection. But do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Do I have any discussion on the minutes?
The only
Anyone have?
question I had was, did we actually send a letter to the?
Yes, there was some delay in that. End of May is a busy time for teachers. But yes, I did send that back. I got responses from Supervisor Dr. Young and Supervisor Diggs. And then the Fredericksburg, forget the exact title, but the non-elected person responded and said that she distributed, but I have not gotten any sort of
Administrator.
yeah, county manager, or no, city
Manager.
yeah,
Okay.
sorry.
Oh, perfect.
City manager responded and distributed, but I have not received any sort of substantive response on either on the letter.
So Supervisor Diggs was the only supervisor that responded?
And Dr. Young,
Oh, and Dr. Young.
yes,
So you got 2 out of 6?
7,
7.
Thanks, Ruby. I was thinking the same thing.
It's pretty sad.
yeah,
Okay, but at least the effort was made.
yes. Well, it's there.
Hey,
Discussion.
Yes,
what did they say?
really just, I got this, thank you.
So now we're sending it.
Like I said, nothing substantive, just
Okay.
simply, thank you for it.
Yeah, which is what they send all the time anyway, even if you ask for a response.
Well,
Yeah.
not all of them even sent, only 2 of them sent that, so
Yeah.
you know, credit what that's due. Any further discussion on the minutes? Any objection to moving to adopt the minute or to approve the minutes? All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, minutes are approved. Number 5, public comment. Do we have any members of the public? Nope. Okay, moving on. Number 6, presentation VRE system plan, draft plan, 2050 draft plan overview, Mr. Ruiz.
Yes, thank you. I see we've got all the slides up there. Awesome. All right, I'll just do the whole next slide, song and dance. Yeah. Awesome. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Nick Ruiz here with Virginia Railway Express. I'm the planning program manager. I'm gonna give you a brief update, same update that was given at the CTAC last week, on our system plan update. So go to the next slide. So VRE and most transit agencies updates our system plan or updates our long range plan every 5 to 10 years. I think going forward with a lot more changes in the regional transportation scene, we're going to be updating subsequent documents more frequently. But our last plan update was done in 2014. And I don't need to convince anyone in this room that there's been a tremendous amount of growth and change in the world and in this region since 2014. Some of the key things that we were trying to respond to in the update of our long range plan, communities are changing and growing. So there was once a time when Northern Virginia was growing faster than this region. That's no longer the case. This region is projected to grow by 65% in terms of households by 2050. Contrast that with Northern Virginia at 35%. Telework is a big thing now, and it's not going away. we've got 60% back in 2019 of our riders on VRE indicated in our rider surveys that they never telework, like not even 1 day a week. But in 2022, that number was 37%. So what we're seeing now is kind of this hybridization of work. Roughly 60 to 70% of our ridership is federal or federal adjacent, like DoD. And there's not a consistent, unified, workforce policy across all agencies like there might have been 10, 20 years ago. Every agency it has the latitude to make their own decisions. And so what that's doing is it's creating kind of a softening of demand in commute ridership to DC. Contrast that with regional highway congestion growth, which is basically at or above pre-pandemic levels. And then I'm not sure how familiar you all are with Transforming Rail in Virginia, but that's the state-led initiative to add rail capacity through some key acquisitions of rail right-of-way, as well as construction of certain infrastructure like the Long Bridge, which is a second 2-track rail bridge across the Potomac River up in DC. VRE is a party to that agreement that the Commonwealth has with CSX, the freight railroad here, as well as Amtrak. And so around 2030, what that's going to allow us to do is to start increasing rail service, daily, weekday and weekend rail service more significantly than we've ever been able to in the past. So we'll be able to run 63% more trains, daily trains, system-wide. What that means for the Fredericksburg area is a schedule that has today 8 round trips, weekdays only. That'll be 14 round trips on the weekdays and potentially up to 7 round trips on the weekend. So a considerable increase in train service. And just one thing I'll point out here, there might have been a time 30 years ago where you could have said that Northern Virginia ends at the Occoquan River. That's not true anymore. And so part of the system plan is looking at transit improvements that can benefit the residents of this region and also the Manassas region where we serve on our Manassas line. Because even though this region's population growth is expected to increase 65%, the jobs housing imbalance is going to get even worse. So most of the high paying, white collar jobs are going to continue to grow in the Northern Virginia and DC core. So anyone who lives down here and desires a job up there, they're either on this bridge or they're on one of our trains. Those are the only two. Well, or on the bus, but they're also going to be on the bridge. So, the need for reimagining VRE between now and 2050 was our imperative. So if you want to go to the next slide. This was a system plan vision that we started out with. We started this process back in the fall of 2022, and our operations board, our governing body, endorsed this vision. It allowed us to kind of move forward with the identification of some service alternatives, as well as refining those alternatives down to like there's a universe of things we could do, but what are the things that we can actually do between now and 2050? And the operative word in this vision is that VRE is going to grow to serve the region. So with the growth in population, with the growth in employment, we didn't feel like keeping VRE at our current level of service was going to be sufficient to meet the region's needs. Moving on to the next slide here. These were the 4 system plan goals that underpin those scenarios that I mentioned. The key being safety and reliability. And I'll just say that we often get questions. Well, if there's capacity, why don't you increase service? If there's funding available, why don't you increase service? Well, the fact is reliability is a huge issue for us today. There is not enough track infrastructure, between here and DC and even north of DC to reliably run the trains we have now, let alone more trains. So the first thing we need to do between now and 2030 is working with the Commonwealth, add additional track infrastructure, modify stations, modify tracks to allow us to put more trains out on the line at or better than 90% on-time performance, because that's our service standard, and we struggle to meet that today. So in a world where we could do a lot of things, we're going to do the most reliable thing and the thing that's safest for our customers. Moving on to the next slide. This is just an overview. I won't spend too long on this, but just an overview of the planning process. It was a 3-phase process. Like I said, it actually started in the summer of 2022, but really got going in earnest in the fall We've briefed FAMPO, I would say 2 or 3 times on the system plan since then. The most recent one being at the most recent FAMPO TAC meeting. We wrapped up the plan analysis in April, and our goal is to go to our operations board this fall and ask for their adoption of the plan. And because we are owned by NVTC, Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, and PRTC, Potomac Rappahannock Transportation Commission, we also have to go to those boards and seek approval of our plan, and that should happen sometime later this year. So the planning process is done. We're just kind of in this holding pattern now as we continue coordination with stakeholders. Moving on to the next slide. This is just a enumeration of the things that VRE is going to be able to do under that Transforming Maryland Virginia agreement by 2030. So like not that far away. I mean, it's a 2050 system plan, but there's a lot of stuff that we can do by 2030, including running a full weekend service, 26 daily trains on the weekends system-wide, as well as running 52 daily trains weekday. That's the 63% increase. We'll also be able to start running some limited reverse flow services. So right now, all the trains go north in the morning and they come south in the evening. And we recognize that we're leaving market share behind that we could be serving people who live inside the Beltway and in the district that commute to jobs at Quantico, Potomac, Potomac Mills, and even in this region too. So, and then of course, some of the other things that we're going to be doing kind of already programmed into our capital plan, they're planned and funded improvements.
Are you allowing questions?
Yeah, you can jump in with questions, Jeff.
You say running full and running trains by the 2030. What's the soonest there might be some weekend service and or some trains running in both directions?
Excellent question. So our fiscal year 25 budget, so fiscal year 25 starts July 1, has funding for a limited Saturday only schedule. That's 3 trains on each line in each direction. So most likely that won't be kicking off till the end of this calendar year, just because of other constraints. But that's kind of the first toe in the water, so to speak, of weekend service. And then, like I said, it's really up to when the infrastructure gets built. Once we have that additional track infrastructure, we can start running the additional service. But realistically, probably not until 2030. Yes.
Piggybacking off of that, when are you looking at doing a round trip all day?
I can move to the next slide and I can give you that. So in 2050 or by 2050, what we hope to do with VRE is grow it out of a commuter peak focus service into more of an all day service, as you said. So our goal by 2050, so that's 26 years from now, is a peak direction train every 20 minutes and a reverse peak train every 30 minutes. And then even outside the peaks, running a train every hour in both directions. So it kind of forms that basement level of service at all other times, but then recognizing the system region still demands a heavily peaked service because there's such a concentration of workforce in the district. And those jobs aren't likely to go anywhere anytime soon, is our estimation. And congestion is not likely to go anywhere anytime soon. Still a heavily peaked service is warranted. One of the things that we'll be able to do in 2050, but also in a limited manner, even before that in 2030, is add express trains. And that's going to be huge for this region because as we envision them, those express trains are going to serve the stations here in the FAMPO region, and then they're going to express into the region's core. So that is a reflection of the data that shows that, we are, just barely competitive with private automobile and the general purpose lanes. As the hot lanes become more popular, we'll use those. If there are other transit options out there, we really need to be competitive from a time perspective. Yes.
So, I'm somewhat ignorant of things, but, there's talk of a second track being built.
In where,
And from, when they get the long bridge, the second long.
yes, yeah, that two additional, so it'll be 4 factor.
Okay.
Yes.
So all of this you talk about expanding is gonna happen before then?
So the Long Bridge will be hopefully open by 2030. So we'll be able to add that 63% more service by 2030. But then outside of that, there's a couple other key pieces of infrastructure, and I can talk about that in just a couple slides.
Right.
That's above and beyond the 2030.
So on your slide that goes 2030 to 2050, it's.
Yeah.
It's the Long Bridge and the other tracks are part of that?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
I know you get to it. Thanks.
Yep. If we want to go on to the next slide, I'm actually gonna skip this slide because what I'm going to enumerate on this is on the next slide. But when we took a look at the kind of global benefits of adding VRE service in 2050, so this is all in 2050 terms, right? We found that there were some significant societal benefits. The big ones are obviously VOT reduction, that's vehicle miles traveled, operating cost savings of private vehicles, as well as like CO2 avoided, and travel delay avoided. And I mean, 51.1 million miles of vehicle travel that wouldn't occur, because we can expand rail service. That's huge. $16.7 million of personal vehicle savings. So that's literally every person who operates a vehicle who either doesn't have to operate those trips because they have transit service available, or doesn't even have to buy another vehicle because, let's say they're a two-earner family, they used to have two vehicles, one of them can give up the vehicle because they're commuting by rail, those are not insignificant benefits. As we look at kind of comparing the benefits to the costs of running the service in 2050, I would just keep kind of those things in mind. And then just as kind of an aside here, this is looking at the freight benefits. So, we're obviously investing in the network, we're investing in, more tracks, 2 tracks across a Long Bridge, additional pieces of infrastructure to keep the railroad fluid. Now, we did kind of a mental exercise. So what happens if the railroad degraded so much that it had to shut down? Like there's not enough fluidity on the railroad by 2050 by 2030, actually. We found that you'd have to add another 4,180 truck trips on 95 to carry the amount of freight that the rail corridor carries in 2030. So it's a significant real cost savings to the Commonwealth and to the region, because that's pavement degradation avoided, that's crashes avoided, emissions avoided. Those 4,100 daily truck trips is a whole lane of trucks from the Pentagon all the way down to Spotsylvania. So you just put them end to end, they're like 72 feet. It's a significant societal benefit just having the rail corridor. So move on to the next slide here. Really we're hoping in 2050 that VRE could serve as the transit spine to a much bigger regional transit network. So I think today people kind of think about transit, or transit is important to people probably right around here, and then maybe kind of right around here. But trips are going all over the place. And so in the future, somebody who lives in Fredericksburg, who works in Crystal City, but doesn't exactly work right next to the station, could, with the increase in frequencies and increase in connectivity, have a 3-seat ride on FXB Go, on VRE, and then on the Metro. And, those are trips that they're just not possible today. They're just not practical today. If you're going to make that trip, you're going to drive. So that's one of the ways that we're trying to increase, our relevance to the region by just running more service, in the peak periods and the off-peak periods. Move to the next slide. This is just an enumeration of the number of trains per day in 2050 that we're projecting. And I'll just point out real briefly that the orange lines are what we hope to explore, connecting bus service to some of the communities outside of our current rail corridor termini, because it's very cost effective to pilot bus service to places that might not be able to support full-on rail service. It's not capital intensive. You can buy a couple buses, you can run them. If things don't work out, you don't, it's not like you've expanded the rail corridor, you've not built a bunch of stations. And so this is something we're actually looking to explore even earlier in the 2030 time. And if you go on to the next slide. Getting back to your question about the capital cost. So this is above and beyond 2030 level of infrastructure. there's a significant amount of capital expenditures that we need to make in that 26-year period, or that 20-year period, excuse me. And I'll just point out that this is a very conservative estimate, so it assumes, like, when you look at the parking, Fredericksburg, right, 650 spaces, like, if you were to envision a parking deck, that's like a 7-story parking deck. That's not realistic, but this is like, if you look at what the projected growth in ridership would be at Fredericksburg Station by 2050, and you assume that everybody drove their private vehicle to the station, that's the additional amount of spaces that you would need. But what we hope is that between now and 2050, there'll be, smarter development, close to the station, and we'll be able to partner with FXB Go and other transit providers to lessen or eliminate that. So, but we had to enumerate the costs all the same because, you don't plan for the best, you plan for the worst, and then if you get something better, then great. And then moving on real quick, I won't spend too much time on the fleet. If you have specific questions about our fleet needs, I'm happy to answer them at the end of the presentation. But just one thing to take away from this slide is that we currently run 100 rail car fleet. And we have funds to add 21 rail cars to that by 2030. But if we were to do a full expansion through 2050, we could potentially need over 200, I think 212 rail cars. And so there'll be a period of time, really 3 major periods of time between now and 2050, where we would need to spend significant amounts of capital, both to add fleet, replace the fleet that's aging out because they have 30-year useful lives, so they can run a little longer than a private automobile, but they still need to be replaced here in the late 2030 decade. And then there's this additional period here where there's additional replacement and then some additional expansion. Yes.
What are those numbers on the bars?
These are in millions. So
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so like the way to read it is, this is the need, like number of rail cars through the years, and then this is kind of when those expenditures would need to take place in order to purchase. Today, a rail car costs about $4 million and a locomotive about $9 million. So it's not cheap to add, rail cars. So one of the things we're going to be looking at post plan is, we've got the 121 that's planned and funded. They're actually being designed and constructed right now. Can we live closer to that means, even outside of the 2030 horizon? And we're doing some analysis. On to the next slide. Same story with locomotives, because you gotta pull the cars. Right now we have a fleet of 20, and they've got a 20-year useful life, so they're going to be aging out by the early 2030s. At the same time that we hope to expand. So, kind of even more significant crunch from a capital perspective. And right now, all of this is unfunded. We have not identified capital funding.
Wow.
So
Where does funding usually come from?
typically either through our federal formula funds, so that's basically the Federal Transit Administration gives us money based on like operating statistics and stuff. As well as Smart Scale, if you're familiar with the state Smart Scale, that's a huge source of funding. And discretionary grants, so applying to the US Department of Transportation for some other one-off grants. Those are really the only sources that we have, reliable sources, but they're insufficient, and they will be insufficient between now and 2050 to cover all.
I notice you haven't mentioned the local subsidies.
Yes.
For rail cars and so forth. A lot of times they'll fund them over like a 20-year period, and the local governments have to pay for those debt service payments. And when I was on the board in 2007, we were scared that the actual gas tax revenue that we were getting wouldn't pay for the subsidy, for the VRE subsidy. So we would have to tap into the general fund money. But luckily, some Spotsylvania joined VRE and started paying for their riders. And that cut the Stafford subsidy down low enough where the gas tax was paying for it. But over time, the gas tax wasn't. The projections look like it's going to come out of the general fund. And do you know how many, like Stafford riders are on there?
I couldn't say off the top of my head. I could get you that information, because every year we do a survey and we count how many from each jurisdiction.
Because last year, the subsidy was about $3,400 per person per year. If like 1,000 more people joined BRE in Stafford, the subsidy would increase $3.4 million, which would exceed the gas tax revenue. And that's my main concern with all of this, that, you know, if you build 1,000 residential units next to the station, and then you get 1,000 more riders, then you're gonna have roughly $3.4 million more in subsidy that you're gonna have to pay out of local money.
Yeah, and thanks for mentioning that, because I failed to mention that another source of capital funding is the jurisdictional subsidy. It's split operating and capital every year, based on a formula allocated, as you said, to the share each jurisdiction contributes to the system in terms of ownership. So, if we move on to, yes.
Working, working off that comment right there, has anyone ever, has any developer proffered money to, BRE to, I mean,
The only one that I'm aware of is at the Potomac Shores,
okay,
development, where they've proffered basically to construct a parking garage and a platform and access to the
Yes.
platform. And so when they're done constructing that, because that's all developer money, taken out of their profits from the development, we would own that facility once it's constructed.
but that's not talking about the train.
No, I'm talking about the yearly subsidy.
No, yeah, that's, yeah.
Proffers are for infrastructure, so one-time revenue.
Mhm. Yeah, and so that's historically and through our master agreement with all of our jurisdictions, that's been, the responsibility of the individual jurisdictions to budget for, raise funds and budget for, and then assist in the operation of the service. That goes back all the way to 91 when we were set up. Yeah. And moving right along here, I just have a few more slides, kind of shifting to the operating side of things. So, in 2050, with that proposed level of service, we'd be looking at a $473 million annual revenues. That's not just fare revenues, but it's also revenues we get from the state, as well as the Passenger Rail Authority for track access fee payments. Unfortunately, the gap in between expense and revenue starts to widen by 2050, and we're looking at an estimated $884 million in annual operating expenses. And so what we're hoping to do in the next couple of years is understand, if our assumptions are correct in 2030 and 2050, and if so, how we can seek additional, sources of annual operating funds, as the gentleman here mentioned, because capital is one thing. You can have a one-time infusion, you can buy a bunch of rolling stock, you can build a station, you can get federal money for that, you can get state money for that, but it really, where the rubber hits the road is every year, there's an expense, there's a benefit, right? There's a lot of people riding, there's a lot of people not on the highway, but there is an expense to each of the jurisdictions, so.
Yeah.
Did you have? Yeah.
No, just, so I'm originally from New York City, so this is, again, like, this is wonderful, because I think the city absolutely needs it, but you're talking about there's federal and state. We also break it down city. If you break it down by city, that's an extra that you buy in. And as citizens and people who live in the region, you understand that it was something that you would pay because it's actually a benefit. The benefits that will come economically, socially, and financially into different regions with a train, right? And with that, public transportation accessibility tends to offset. I know it doesn't seem like that now, but cities would start thriving. People, would definitely have more interest into coming into this region and work and live and obviously spend their money here if it was a lot more accessible. Many people in DC, they're stuck having like their stuck living in DC because the accessibility is not always guaranteed. So even though all these subsidies and all of that may seem scary right now, once it happens, trust me, a lot more people flood in. Also, I'm thinking of someone who's like 30 years old. I have a lot of friends who they don't want to move to cities that all you do is drive. When I tell them all I do is drive here, they laugh. because my whole life I've been taking trains. And unfortunately, I had to start driving when I moved here, but they refuse to leave the city because it's not accessible. And it's not a cost with the insurance and a car that they want to take on. So yes, it may seem scary now, but these funds and this funding would be offset once you have that.
Yeah, and I'll just.
If you add the city aspect to it, I don't think that should be an issue, but I mean, like that, I know it's controversial, but for me, I don't see that as an issue. That would be an added help for that, and also taxes.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I'll say, I recently saw a statistic that Prince William County has some of the highest commuting costs per share of income of any county in the country. I think it's something like 17% is the average, right? That's really high for the national average, and so one of the things VRE can do is can help level off the growth, the inflation in, commuting costs and travel costs, because, when you have a sustainable, larger ridership base, you can keep costs relatively consistent year to year to year. And so, fare increases don't happen as often as gas price increases, as insurance increases, things like that. So, but those are benefits, as you rightly point out, they accrue over decades, they don't accrue today and tomorrow.
Right.
So, if we just go to the last slide, oh, yep. Mhm.
On that, revenue, because I can't see all of it there.
Sorry, I can sit down.
On the revenue, say presently, and then on the 2050, what is the approximate percentage that the riders themselves are paying of the total revenue?
So today it's about 12%. And so we expect that would probably increase to around 30%, 30 to 32% by 2030, but then drop back down to about 16% by 2030. And that's just the way that the numbers work out. It's as I say here, with under current funding sources and current methodologies for funding, you see a 63% increase in revenues, and that's not just fare revenues, it's all revenues. But when you start to run that level of service, you see a 136% increase. So, and that's not inconsistent with other commuter rail systems around the country. Typically, it's between about 10% and about 40% of fares are paid by, or excuse me, of revenues to operate are paid through fares. We've enjoyed historically very high fare voucher recovery ratio because it's been such a peak service. There's a transit subsidy, most people don't actually physically pay their fare, the federal government does for them. So price inelasticity is a real thing.
What do you mentioned other transit systems with commuter rail, what do they usually do to address the increase in operating costs?
I couldn't say that there's one, magic bullet across the country, but the systems that seem to have more sustainable, finances have generally two things. One is a dedicated regional source of funding that is stable, that, maybe comes from multiple different revenue streams, as well as a ridership base that is not a one-trick pony, right? It's not just one type of person riding, it's serving a bunch of different trips, and that's just a result of the development patterns. And if you've been out to Chicago, and ridden their Metro trains, out to the suburbs, they're little towns at every station or most stations. And so there's a lot more back and forth travel between those communities and the loop. Whereas, in our region, it's kind of a one-way, thing.
But it could become the loop, especially with the growth that we're seeing.
Exactly, especially if more uses are built in the future, if the jurisdictions, find it desirable to build more around the station.
Would an expansion of, I don't know if this has been considered at all, but would an expansion of stations have any impact on that? Like right now it goes to Spotsylvania, will it ever go to Richmond?
Yeah, we looked at at a high level, the costs associated with that, and that's where things really start to fall apart. So what we did as like kind of a aspirational, but still fiscally somewhat realistic, constrained our system to Spotsylvania is as far south as we're gonna go, Broad Run on the Manassas line is as far as. One last content slide here, just wanna show you kind of the same growth in a different way. Currently, we put about 7,700 daily riders on our system. In 2030, we could see up to 21,500 daily riders. And then with this ultimate increase in service, the 20-minute headways, the reverse peak service, a 262% increase in riders. So that's basically a VRE becoming way more relevant to more people. That's not just the growth in population doing all of this, that's more trains that people say, well, gee, this is a more convenient option for me, I'm going to use.
How do you define ridership?
It's persons boarding the train. So that's, yeah, it's boardings, average daily boardings.
One person going is for one trip to DC or that area is called a trip.
It's called a trip,
It's
yeah.
called a trip and that's called ridership.
Yes. Yes.
So I felt like when I looked at the presentation. People are creatures of habit. So what is your marketing plan to get people to become aware of the additional trains and better timing and things like that? Because again, people are creatures of habit. The other thing to that is for someone that lives in King George County, because I already have to either drive to Maryland to the closest metro station or drive to Fredericksburg, well, might as well just drive all the way. So how do you convince them?
Well, I'll say this, the second point, there will always be areas that we just won't be able to be as competitive, as other modes of travel. And so we can't be in every, a dog in every fight. But to your first point, one of the things that our CEO has done, started about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, he aggressively increased our marketing budget. We never really could spend a lot of money on marketing because pre-pandemic, we actually didn't have the rail capacity. We didn't have the seat capacity. So if we went out and did a big splashy campaign, ride the train, people would ride the train and then it'd be standing in the aisle and it'd be like, this stinks, So now we can do that. And I believe he increased, the marketing budget like over 100% or something like that. And we have 2 people in marketing. We have a growing stable of consultants that provide support on campaigns and things like that. One other thing we're doing, and we're going to continue to do, is when we go out for grants. So we want a grant from the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission to upgrade our Crystal City station. Every grant is going to have a line item for additional marketing. So we've got the money to be able to go with that grant and make a splash and say, hey, like Bristol City Station, we're expanding the station, there'll be more service, there'll be more of this. Take the train. So yeah, we're thinking about that because we've never really been able to do that before, and we have a long way to go. I'm not gonna make it seem like more aspirational than it really is, but that's one of the ways to go. So I don't know who's
You can go.
How, couple things. Number one, I got some property on the railroad and I'm getting letters from the Virginia Railway, whatever they are,
Passenger Rail Authority.
out there. They're coming in to do some surveying for the 4th track.
Yes.
So they want to 4-track it from DC to Spotsylvania. Is that my understanding?
No, so you mind, which county is your?
Spotsylvania.
Okay, so essentially what's going on with that is the plans by 2050 would be a 3-track corridor to Spotsylvania. North of Alexandria, it would be a 4-track corridor. What they are doing is surveying the land because ultimately, even beyond 2050, CSX has given the Commonwealth the land in most places to build another track, to build a 4th track. Not everywhere, but in some places. So they're surveying that and assessing, basically, yeah.
That leads to my next question.
Mhm.
So I understand how this works. CSX, old RFP, right? I've zoned it since before the Civil War. How do you pay rent to go on that track? Is how that works?
So it's complicated, but yes. So essentially, we pay a track access fee per train mile. Now that the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority owns the tracks, nothing has changed from a dollars perspective. It's all going back to maintaining that railroad. It's going back to CSX, but it's passing through Virginia Passenger Rail.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we just 3-tracked it from Spotsylvania up to the city here.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right in this area, yeah.
And then you got 3 tracks across Quantico, right?
Yep, 3 tracks in that area.
So this is a little of a tight squeeze here,
Mhm.
obviously.
Yeah, So
Where are your issues, I guess is my,
the major issues are actually in those places where the third track was installed, which is gonna help, you know, and then north of Franconia. Really north of Franconia, and that's why we've got the 4-track segment that planned and funded for 2030 construction opening date, because that's really where all the conflicts occur.
and then because you're on with CSX, who gets priority? Who gets priority on the track? You or them?
So statutorily, Amtrak gets priority. The dispatching it's more of an art than a science, and I think dispatchers will maximize fluidity across the railroad, even if literally one train has to go in front of another, you know, like a freight train has to go in front of a passenger train. Overall, across the service day, you know, theoretically, the passenger train should be given priority, so.
Seems like that from watching it. The freight trains do a lot of stopping, but all right, now one more question. No, I can't remember what it was.
And I'll just say, speaking of trains, I actually have to catch an Amtrak back to Alexandria in a couple of minutes. So I can entertain one more question. if
Okay.
that's- Yeah,
How does Amtrak compete with you on a dollar basis?
on a dollar per.
Much cheaper to take the.
I'm not aware of their, yeah.
I mean, do they hurt you or do they help you?
No, I think actually in 2030, they're gonna be a huge part of our success. The step up program, which we had before the pandemic, it allowed VRE customers with monthly or 10 ride tickets to ride Amtrak trains with like an additional smaller ticket. We're gonna bring that back next fiscal year. And that's a huge way to add capacity,
Right.
without having to, essentially without having to pay to put another train on the line, because there's already a train going.
Right.
Yeah, one more and then I do.
Real quick, just finishing up actually the question I asked earlier. So when do you see the first like southbound morning trip happening?
The plan calls for that after 2030.
After 2030, okay, cool, that was my question.
Just the last slide I'll leave you with here, just our plan for the future. As I mentioned, we are not going to the ops board in June. That was our previous plan, but as I mentioned at the top, the fall is likely when we'll go back to our operations board, and then we'll return to the commissions the month after for their. So I really appreciate all the questions. If I wasn't able to answer any of your questions, you can send them to John, and then he'll send them to me, and I can answer them personally.
Do you have a map that shows the third track where it's going? Because most of the areas don't have a third track.
Yes, yeah,
They aren't planning on it.
yeah.
Wide water, for instance, that track's only like 10 feet above sea level, so.
Yeah,
I think you're gonna have to raise the track for a mile and go across, creeks and so forth, so it's gonna be very costly. And there's, even the Rappahannock River Bridge,
yeah.
you're gonna have to replace the bridge and put 2 tracks on that, and there's a number of other, bridges.
The Virginia Passenger Rail Authority website, they've got all those maps on their website. And most of those projects, as you mentioned, passenger rail authority projects that are being funded by their shop and not by VRE. So,
Those are the most expensive
yeah,
projects to add, and none of them are on the list for the third track.
We don't want you to miss your train, so.
I appreciate it. It was actually
Time.
a few minutes late. Speak of reliability.
Yeah, hey, it's Amtrak, you're not on the hook for that. All right,
Thank you.
yes, thank you very much. All right, moving on, VDOT and transit, reporter problem. Do we don't have the person from VDOT here, so
Does anybody have anything that I will then?
I'm happy. Oh, no.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I drive a lot. 2 different things. This is kind of, I'm gonna hand this up to you, Dr. Reddit. All right, it's kind of hard to see, but alongside Warrenton Road off of Sanford Drive, going down towards where the IHOP is and so forth, there's a road called Simpson Road. There was a stop sign and a street sign that was there. But with all the construction work that's been done on that particular intersection, one of the work trucks backed right over the sign, and these photos basically show the sign laying on the ground still, they're right there. The other thing that I wanted, nothing's gonna be done about it, but in the cloverleaf for exit 133, Twice in a week and a half, there were auto trailer that wound up flipping. And the entire flow relief wound up being blocked for about 3 or 4 hours each particular. So I just, wanted to send that, I guess, towards Lynn, so she'd be able to.
Where was that?
Where here's Warrenton Road, here's 95. Going north on that part of the flow relief, these types of trucks, auto trailer trucks, wound up going at probably too high a rate of speed.
Oh.
And it's a very tight turn as it is, and which is something that we brought up months ago. And so they flipped. So, yeah.
I mean, at some point, you'd think the dealerships would talk to their drivers and say, hey, you're destroying our stock.
Well, it hasn't happened in the last like a month, so. Maybe
Can I ask you
get
a
the
question? Do you know if it was a class 7 vehicle or higher, or if it was a smaller independent?
It was somewhat smaller. It
Okay.
was 3 different vehicles on it.
Okay.
Like, that's why I used that particular part out there.
Okay.
You should know about this because I found out about it through their Twitter account. Yeah. Because I haven't had to leave the house in a while. Just nice. Sure. All right. Any other
Yeah,
report
I'll
problem?
bring up the same one I bring up every month. Caroline County, Spotsylvania County line on 17, south, north, south. Truckers, and I've talked to several here lately, they take to the opposite lane to avoid this,
The culvert.
it's
Oh,
something
black
I
out.
mean, it'll knock your teeth out. And, it's not safe because the sight distance ain't there. And then, but they're all, if they see no traffic coming, they're going to the left lane to not hit it.
Wasn't there an accident there yesterday?
I don't know.
It was.
But it's right at the county line, so I think you need to get the Caroline County, the Caroline VDOT maintenance guy and the Spotsy maintenance guy, because I'm sure they're doing this on it.
Yeah.
Right, well, that's a Caroline, I don't know, that's a Caroline, and it's probably getting. And I'll meet them out there and show it to them. Get them on the phone. It's bad, real bad.
Any other problems? No, we're good. All right, moving on to my favorite part, election of officers. I haven't run an election before. So do I hear nominations for chair for the next year? Or I guess we already have a nomination. Do I have any other nominations? No? All right. All in favor of Tim for a chair for next year?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
All opposed?
Okay,
Please record Tim is opposing.
That joke never gets old.
Especially once you've done it. Okay, vice chair, I understand I have a new nomination for vice chair.
Proud to be able to offer the name of Yolanda Hipsky from the city of Fredericksburg. She not only was like, well, I'll do it if nobody else will, she was like, I was eager to do it, so thank you.
Sure, why not?
Be careful, we've had a few vice chairs become chair very quickly.
Against their will, apparently.
Yeah.
Well, you were technically chair for like 10 minutes there, in January.
Yeah, we had that operation right now.
Yeah. 25th Amendment and all that. All right, any other nominations? All right, all in favor of Ms. Hipsky?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we have a chair and vice chair elect. All right, 8B, endorse tip amendments. This is an action item.
All right, I'll go through these relatively quickly. So before you, we have 2 smaller tip amendments. One is going to be adding FRT 0018. It's a Fredericksburg Transportation, or the old
I'd like to
FXB.
motion we endorse all 3 administrative changes to the.
I have a second. Do
Second.
we have any discussion? All right, all in favor? Aye. All opposed?
Thank you.
All right. Here I was worrying that was gonna be like an hour conversation. All right, 8C, Smart Scale, round 6 presentation.
Okay, so I believe you had a longer conversation with Ian and Lita in the previous month. There have been some updates to the project since then. During the list, what arrived, and kind of you can go ahead and go to the FAMPO list. Yeah. So we knew that we were going to be limited on this because basically one project had already screened out of consideration. However, we also had the Route 1 South Point project also kind of moved off the list in a weird way. So on the GWRC side, you also had the 208 project also being moved around.
Can we see that?
So,
too, the GWRC?
Yeah, it's the next slide. So,
The moment we leave that slide, still not clear, but I know a 208 study difference from a 208 pipeline study. Clarify why the word pipeline keeps popping up.
it's a specific VDOT program for basically assisting in the planning and engineering studies to get projects smart scale ready. So it's just their terminology of basically feeding projects into for the purpose of going through smart scale.
Thanks.
Sorry, that's fine. So in this case, WAPE raised questions over the eligibility of the South Point project, and so whether or not it was going to be eligible on the FAMPO list, and so that project was moved on to, I believe, the local list. As a result, a project from the local list was moved on to the GWRC list. We're just playing musical chairs with the program because one of the projects, the previous smart 2A project, if it was funded from the regional pot, it would actually prohibit any of the other 208 projects from being considered. So in order to avoid that, as well as the concerns of South Park, they've shifted the projects just slightly to determine which one's on, and this was something that was recommended by Spotsylvania staff for endorsement. So these are the projects, at least from the FAMPO side, it's pretty clear because if we were continued on with this, the South Point, it would have been screened out. We would have lost a project and a spot for consideration while also moving it into a different area so that it could continue. And the same thing is happening with the GWRC projects. They're just basically rotate everybody around so they remain eligible.
John, so you need to say the Massaponax one?
Sorry, yes, I've been saying South Point, I should be saying the Massaponax Route 1 intersection. My apologies. I've worked on both of them. I'm going to swap them. So,
What about that note at the bottom of the slide? Conditionally screened out until they meet requirements to screen in. Is there a concern there, or is that just?
that's
regular?
for the application process. So
Okay.
that once they screen in, basically they're saying you can't assume that they're screened in.
Gotcha.
That's
Okay.
my understanding.
Cool.
Sort of like what, Ruben was asking. These are smart scale projects.
Correct.
And,
Or applying for
with
smart scale.
Smart scale, you had to have, the project had to be ready.
Yes, but
So I don't understand the study in that context.
so there are projects that are derived out of those studies that we're looking at. Those
So these are
studies are getting them.
already been
Ready.
through the pipeline study. That's just talking about where they came from.
Yes, correct.
They're ready for smart scale.
So the recommendations that come out of that are the ones that are.
Thanks.
Oh,
I think moving that one from one to the other is something that we asked about. I mean,
Yeah.
it could happen, so I move that we endorse both.
Do I have a second? Do I have any discussion?
No.
Revert.
I think it's safe to say that all of these projects, none of these projects, one single thing, what's getting us away from automobile dependence. As a matter of fact, they do the reverse. They're inducing us to have even more automobile dependence. So I would say that we should tell people we got, go back to the drawing board.
Any further discussion?
I want to ask you a question. I didn't want to ask you a follow-up. It was in there. But on the highways, approximately what percentage of the total cost would the taxpayers pay per mile of roadway. Well,
How much the taxpayers?
For maintenance, you mean?
per mile of roadway, yeah,
Roadway or
of
railway?
the tax, no roadway.
He's trying to compare rail, cost to taxpayers of rail versus cost to taxpayers of highways.
Paying out of that tax. He said, what that cost was up there, that the riders are actually paying 12% of what it cost
Mhm.
for that $800 million up there, 12%. So what are we paying when we ride on the highway?
The problem is we're paying through various different taxes. Like, there's not one tax that we can point to and say, well, this tax pays for highways.
Yeah, I know it's not one tax, but we are paying a bundle of those taxes, right?
Well, I was paying for, yeah, wouldn't it be 100%?
No, they've been dipping from the general revenue for a while to short the highway trust fund as well as other funding sources. I mean, they allocate general funds for transportation projects. I mean, that could be your real estate tax or even sales tax. I mean,
If you look
Could
at
that
your
be
phone
something-
bill, there's a surcharge on there for transportation.
Really?
Yeah.
telecom,
That's
yeah.
crazy.
I had a quick question. Isn't there a tax or something, and I can't remember who I saw it, where some of the commuters are actually paying like a highway tax?
I think I think there's been conversation about a highway use tax
Right,
regarding electric vehicles.
Yeah,
Because they don't pay the gas tax.
Highway user fee.
Yeah, but I'm not aware, I'm not having an electric
it's
vehicle.
assuming that if you have more than an MPG rating, and actually this will go for even regular combustion vehicles that just have more than 23.6 miles to the gallon combined, along with assumes that you're gonna drive 11,600 miles per year,
Which I
you're
have
paying
never done.
85% of that just from the highway use.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
Choice, where you can put a device in your car if you use less miles. If you cost less that way, you can choose that way.
so I guess my question would be, how much is that tax going to rail?
Much is-
That's a pilot program.
My question would be, is how much of that tax is going to rail?
The highway.
To rail.
Right, the highway, you said, highway.
Discussion
No. Yeah, I would say,
I was asking the question because I was curious since we were on the, thing on taxes and where they go.
well, I think the tax question was germane to
What he was saying.
what you were saying, and which is germane to what you were saying, which is germane to what is at hand. So I'm gonna say it's okay, but
I was just questioning.
yeah, I think that's a good question, and I mean, is there a way we could get maybe a presentation in a future meeting on how that all shakes out to answer his question and also to answer her question?
I mean, if you want to hear about my dissertation, sure.
I read.
If you can just.
Yeah. So fuel economy standards was my dissertation.
Okay, so you could tell us
So,
exactly. what
If you want to get into that, we can.
For the lender.
I'm warning, but
My doctorate's in the mail, so.
yes, and I've been doing fuel tax analysis for RT. That's the reason why I know about
Okay.
use fees.
Okay, so we can get that in a future meeting,
Maybe.
maybe?
Yeah.
Okay,
I had to look through it, but if you want the exact answers, how much, say, your vehicle fuels tax or whatnot goes into each one of the roads. Maybe I can find that. I don't know how it's going to be cut because even the fuels tax is split 3 different ways. That it's not necessarily transparent to.
well, I think the question at the core here is, do local jurisdictions pay more for rail or for highways?
Okay.
That's the core of the question, isn't it?
So what did he say?
The core of the question is do local jurisdictions pay more for rail or do they pay more for highways? Right?
We're talking about the user. Yeah.
I'm talking about the users.
Oh, the users themselves per person.
Corporations that are users as well for
Oh,
freight, over
gosh.
the road freight and everything. It's impossible to answer your question, honestly.
Yeah,
So many lots of money out there.
Well, and so many different kinds of users.
Yes.
And so many streams of income.
All that direction. Payment that's out there. That we're, like you said, I think the figure came up with 80 to 90% of the cost, whereas the user of the rail is paying 12%. which makes me think that I'm driving my car everywhere I go, but I'm also helping to pay the people that get on VRE.
Mhm.
I'm paying a whole lot of his costs of riding VRE.
Mhm.
He's only paying a very small part of his, but I'm paying 85% of my cost of driving to wherever I have to drive to.
But a lot of the cost that he was talking about was also in material, like, so actual capital assets, the locomotives, the cars. So it's easier to break down a percentage of paying, you know, what the rider pays for the assets versus the track, because you also, similar to over the road, you've got freight company, you know, CSX is presumably pitching some money into the kitty for that kind of rail expansion and things. Sounded like they were getting a pretty good deal, from what he said as well, as far as being able to increase their throughput.
I think the other thing to keep in mind is if you're a driver and you're spending, you know, you're worried about what you're spending to enable people to be on the rail is if you're driving around Fredericksburg and I'm taking the train up to Alexandria, you're benefiting from the fact that my car's not on the road. You know, so I think it's hard for us to calculate all these numbers. First of all, just because there's so many factors playing, and maybe that's just because I don't like math, but I mean, I think your point is taken though, is what am I paying as a taxpayer to drive and what am I paying to subsidize rails? But there's benefits to what I want to point out is that there's benefits to rail even for the person not taking rail. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I realize that.
Okay.
I feel like the cost, the price for the person taking the wheel is not very. I think that the taxpayers themselves are paying a really high price for rail.
Let me see if I can explain it. There's two different costs. There's operating costs and then there's infrastructure costs. So operating costs are paid by 2.2% gas tax and Stafford, Fredericksburg, Foxy. King George doesn't pay it, so their riders are riding for free on us. Okay? Same with Carolina. So 2.2% of $50 fill up, you're paying $1 tax, and most of it is going to be already.
Okay, can we get back to the matter at hand though? I do have a motion on endorsing GWRC and FAMPO smart scale applications. And I have a second. Do we have further discussion regarding the motion? All right. Brought up to move away from automobiles. Did anyone have further discussion on that?
The only question I have is that even possible in the time frame? Because if I recall, it started at least a year ago when they started pre-selecting. And of course, it's always moving, but if a year's already gone by, I don't know that it would be, to your point, maybe that's something to recommend for the future, for next year or whatever the next smart scale is.
It would be better to do nothing than to dig ourselves deeper into the hole we've been digging for the last 50 years.
I think it goes way back beyond 50 years. I would argue that our dependence on cars goes back at least but that's
It's all the 40s and 50s from the road building lobby, convinced the government to dump transit and start putting all their money into roads.
and I'm
So that's why I'm saying the last 40, 50 years.
and I'm sympathetic to that, but I think that
Actually, more than that, the other, from the 50s to now, my math is bad. Okay, 70 years.
yeah. While I'm sympathetic to that, I would argue this isn't the venue for that. That's going to require a state and federal level change in policy. In fact, even an international one at this point. Okay, your point is taken though. Point taken.
The benefit to the taxpayer, I think, that we should consider too, is that if these projects are funded through the smart scale program, that's less money that comes directly out of the region.
Tax money.
Somebody's gonna get it, yes, basically.
We squandered, yeah. It's not like it's not like it came from another country.
I mean, this is a statewide thing. Every single jurisdiction is putting into the smart scale as part of their fuels tax. If you don't put anything, you're going to be donating it to other projects submitted in the region, or that's right, submitted in this state.
So Mr. Farley's point is taken, that, and I'm frankly very sympathetic to that idea, since I'm driving a 2012 car and would love to not drive another one. But the, do we have further discussion on the matter at hand, the smart scale? No? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Alright.
All right, with one opposed, the motion passes. We've endorsed both GWRC and FAMPO. Staff reports.
Okay, first off, I might do something that isn't on the agenda, but staff will like to present a little certificate of appreciation for Nick. So basically acknowledging that being a chair isn't easy. You at least have to deal with 10 emails from me a year and none of them are short. So So, moving on, so I'm gonna do the TAC real quick. They basically saw the VRE presentation that y'all saw here today, the tip amendments that you're seeing here today, as well as it was the smart scale discussion. So those were their big items, and so you've seen most of those. The policy committee, let's see, that was last May. Or sorry, yes, May. Ooh, man, this is one. Yeah. One of the big items was that they approved the CTAC, CMAC STBG allocations. And so that was our regional funding that presented about $10 million in funding to various projects. So that was approved. The other item as far as the policy committee meeting is they've just wrapped up their RTA subcommittee discussions. And so I will just make y'all aware that for the upcoming meeting, they will probably be having a discussion on that as well.
Does it seem like there's any consensus, or is that something we find out at the next meeting?
So it is, there is, I don't even want to use the word consensus, but there is at least a majority-ish opinion of a cohort. Spotsylvania has, as well as King George, has come out and put in their opposition to the idea. Caroline County has now provided input. They are remaining silent. And then it appears that Fredericksburg and Stafford at least view that there is a consideration for a 70-30 split using a recordation tax, transit occupancy tax, as well as a half-cent sales tax.
Okay.
So they're expecting to put 70% of that funds into a regional entity.
But regardless, it's a state, it would be something
Yes.
decided by state.
So the state legislature ultimately decides this, so it's not something that the jurisdictions come to own. The state will basically write the legislation, act as the pass-through, and then the creation of authority happens by the legislative action.
Okay. All right, I think that's, yes.
One thing regarding that too, interestingly, from Spotsylvania, there were 2 opposed and 1 supportive of having the RTA, Chris Yakubowski.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I was at the board meeting last night and they voted 5-1 against.
Right, and I know who the one was.
Yeah, Chris, yeah.
Yeah.
But again, against an RTA, but again, it doesn't matter because it's a state issue.
Well, well, anyway, listen, as chairman, we're gonna work on that.
Okay,
All right?
I look forward to
We need to
your,
work on that, but I kind of understand politically where they're coming from. Chris, who supported it, brought up a good point that what we're trying to do right now is start up a taxing authority. Really, what are we gonna do with it? We don't really have a plan. We had Becky came up with some stuff, right? Adder connector and this and that, we had some regional. They would like to see more concrete regional projects. What are we all gonna get on board with? And identify it and say, okay, these are the projects that we want to get done as a region. Now let's go get the taxing authority. Thank you very much, Dylan Rule. and then go ahead and do that. That was the gist of last night's Spotsylvania County Board meeting.
It was also a very spirited discussion that the entire group had at the RTA meeting too. And they ultimately arrived at that same premise that what they were going to have to try to do with the RTA, if it were to come into being, was to definitely try to find projects that would wind up impacting all three jurisdictions, Spotsy, the city, and Stafford. You know, things like the river crossing park and other things. What they did realize, and it was good to be able to see, is that they understood that you could do something like, you know, something down in Spotsylvania that ultimately would wind up assisting how traffic is dealt with in Stafford County as well, and vice versa.
Well, RTA would be a good way to handle the river crossing, but also the Harrison Road
Actually, that's
exit thing.
Right.
also on what this policy committee discussed was actually adding the Harrison Road interchange as a part of the scoping work in the traffic model for the
Right.
river crossing study. So
Yes.
thank you for saying
The
that.
combination
Yeah.
of the Harrison Road with the river crossing,
Yeah.
because they had done them separately. They wanted to see how they
You
affect
could
each
throw
other.
the Enon connector in there on that.
Yeah,
Well, they have.
onto Centerport Parkway as well.
They've done that through a lot of the east-west study, but they did not look at just the river crossing as well as the Harrison Road interchange. They looked at all of that
I mean, I hate to say it,
connectivity.
but there's a
Enon.
big study needs to be done. And
Yeah.
it needs to
So,
go from Carolina to Culpeper, right? Because if you're looking east-west, I would like to know, and I know y'all got the fancy gadgets now that can tell you where somebody starts and somewhere it finishes. We didn't have that before. It used to be a guy on the corner just counting cars going by, you know? But anyway, is how many people are going from King George to Orange?
Mm.
Okay, probably not many.
No.
I doubt. I wouldn't think so. So, you know, are we talking about a Route 3 by, you know, I'm at Spotsylvania, I'm thinking, how can I get traffic off Route 3? Okay, because we're limited, we ain't putting any more lanes on Route 3. You know, unless we're buying fast food places and stuff like that. That's just, it's not gonna happen. So we need to think about a parallel road to Route 3. We need a bypass around Route 3. And what are we gonna do with that? But who's taking it? Are we putting people through to Orange, or the people that are going past my part of congested Route 3 to Orange? Where they coming from? They're coming from north. They need to go out west. So really, that's the northwest quadrant of the outer connector. Okay, that's what really needs to be built. That's Stafford. Okay, now I'm looking at Stafford. But to me, it's a regional thing. Okay, you doing that helps me down there.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying? And then 17. Well, okay, let's look at Route 2. Route 2, we're gonna, VDOT's looking at $60 million for 1.3 miles. Okay, for landing from the city line down to the Shannon Airport, $60 million. Okay. I don't see it, but anyway, if we build a bridge in New Post, 17 over to Route 3, most of your Route 2 traffic, a lot of it's sand and gravel trucks coming up out of 17 that are going across that bump. Okay, every day. That's the reason bump you get to work. Sand and gravel trucks are in it every day. Trash trucks going down to King William and down Tappahannock. They're down there all the time. They would go up Route 3 because they're trying to get to the Blue Grade across to go Butler Road up there anyway. So that would help. City of Fredericksburg, connecting Bellman Road to Shannon Drive. There's one landowner and I think he'd be willing to connect it. But that would take a lot of traffic off Route 2. That goes up lands down the road. Just little things like that. We need to figure out little connections that are, but we gotta go back to where is the trip starting, where is it stopping? And can we focus, because I'd rather take the $60 million off Route 2, I'd rather put it at the bridge in New Post. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
A study has to be done, okay, I know, a study has to be done, but those are things that I think, and then the Enon thing, if I could build that right now, that would be built right now.
Yeah.
That would be built right now. The things, man, I mean, anyway. Yeah, well, anyway, the wheels of justice, slowly. Anyway, that's my, soapbox today.
I agree with you on connectivity, more alternate routes we have, the better it is.
We've got to think,
That's what the city planning process is. Grid system has been working for hundreds and hundreds of years. And that's what we don't have. Grid.
not have grid.
2 north-south major roads, and that's it. 10,
And we
10 east-west roads.
We can't live and die by I-95 either. So we gotta kind of look at I-95 as a river that we just want to cross. We don't necessarily want to get into it. You know what I'm saying?
You.
And then I personally thinking it from a regional standpoint in Caroline and King George, but, and this goes, probably Congress needs to go look at this, but you ought to take I-85, which stops at Petersburg, okay? Take it off of 295 at Hanover and run 301 all the way to Annapolis with another intersection, okay? Or just push 85 all the way to Annapolis, because eventually 95 is gonna get to the point where Route 3 where we can't widen it anymore. In fact, thanks to our Transurban agreement, we can't unless we buy them out. Dumbest thing ever signed. Okay, with the toll roads.
It's
Dumb.
the biggest mistake, transportation mistake.
So, you know, what are we gonna do? He's talking about our population rising by 63% and by when? 20?
The service is 63%. That's the.
Whatever
that's
it
the-
was, it's
It's the
scaring the
significant
hell out of
increase,
me, I
yeah.
can tell
I
you.
think it was 57%, I want to say, was what it was saying.
But we need to think past a 6-year plan. We need to look past 2050. We need to look further. I've always said we need to look further than that, because by the time you're done talking about it, it's obsolete. The 17 and 95, you just spent $250 million fixing that, and we have a triple left turn lane turning on 17.
Well, part of the problem was the design for it wasn't.
Anyway, don't get me started. All right, I'm done.
All right,
You said that, the 5-1 vote, but I said in here about a few months ago that, and I told them that the reason they were against the RTA is because, most of those guys that, and some of you have been on the board, when they ran for office, they ran on the idea that, and they promised their voters that I will not raise taxes. And of course, the RTA has 6 taxes that they would be raising. 4.
But yeah,
So they didn't, they said, hey, we will not break our promises. But, we and I have agreed, and we're both on that Spotsylvania County board,
transportation committee.
transportation today. We realized that there's just not enough money out there. And as much as I'm very conservative, there are times when we have to have the money and you have to go and get it. We just don't want to put conservative enough that we don't want to spend it on something that's wasteful. But we don't consider these projects as being wasteful, because we need some of these projects, because when you run on crummy roads and crummy bridges, it tears your cars up. And we need those, and when you're sitting in traffic, you set the same traffic light 4 times. And I do that quite often because I live in Massachusetts area, and I sit through the light there at South Point, waiting to turn left or waiting to turn right. That happens all the time, and so yeah, go ahead.
I would like to correct one word that you used, that is, we need those. We don't need any of this stuff unless we want to keep doing business as usual, more sprawl. You know, what we need are communities where you can walk where you want to go and you don't have to worry about the potholes in the road.
Okay, but now, one thing, I think that what we talked about earlier about transit is, I believe, the only person that got here about transit tonight was the gentleman that's already left.
And the reason he couldn't, the reason the rest of us couldn't get there is because for the last 70 years, we've been doing nothing but putting down asphalt and encouraging people to take cars. And we gotta stop it.
Really, we've just been paving the roads that they rode horses on, that's all we've really done.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
I'm gonna take Rupert's side on this one. If there was a bus, I would have taken it here from my house. But, and there wasn't, so I drove.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I completely agree with your point of we all took cars here. Like, yeah, that's because some of us were forced to by the necessity of what's available. I will, however, agree that this area is not ready for the massive amount of transit that would be required to make that feasible. Hopefully it will be one day though.
What do you mean massive?
Well, to Rupert, so I live off of 17, right?
Sorry?
I live off of 17 in Stafford. For me to,
You're not qualified for transit, but you go to someplace that far from the center of,
find me affordable housing nearby and I'll live there, but it isn't there. Like I live there because because it's closer to where I work, right? If you find me a way for there to be transit that where I can live in Fredericksburg, where I'm more centralized.
it would be just as stupid to subsidize our suburban sprawl with transit as it is to subsidize it with asphalt like we've been doing for the last 70 years.
Okay.
You live in walkable communities. You don't expect the darn transit to go to some stupid place where people are spread out all over.
Alan, you had something?
Yeah, going back to what we were talking about, what Robert was talking about. One of the hope, I think, for not only the Spotsylvania supervisors, but also several of the ones in Stafford as well, is that they can say, well, we didn't want to raise taxes, but of course, ultimately, when it goes to the state will, if an RTA is created, will force them to. And so they can wind up saying, well, it wasn't me.
Well, and they need to have a viable solution and project to say to the people.
This is what you'll get.
This is why we had to do it.
Right.
And
And even
right
if,
now, they can't say that. They don't feel like they can say that. Chris did.
Right. I mean, even if it winds up just being the seed money to leverage for a large project, that can come from the RTA that would never allow it to happen.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I thought the RTA was tabled by state legislators.
It was, but it's come up a few years in a row.
Okay, so it's gonna come up next year.
Shoot,
Yeah,
man,
I
I started
agree
talking
that
about
we-
it when I was on the board in King George. I mean,
Yeah,
we
it's-
talked about 20
It gets talked about, but I think last year it went down by like one vote.
One vote.
Yeah, so it could still, it gets closer each year and.
We were
and-
trying to get local support.
But I think we do need, the legislation that I saw required voter referendum. So in order,
No, that's not what,
That's not.
that's
work
not the
that way.
current form.
and I think that's what was requested in Stafford, for the voters to decide. So, if that was the case, you need projects that the voters will support in order to get it passed.
The vote for this means this.
I think the referendum was if they were going to use 1% for school construction. That's what the sales tax 1% was supposed to be for as far as a referendum. But obviously that got encompassed into the state attempt to have 1% school construction across the whole board.
All right, one last item of staff reports is, I'm sorry to say, but this meeting will be Connor Anderson's last CTAC. He will be moving on. He has gotten himself a nice cushy private VHB position for their GIS team. And so we are excited but sad that he is moving on. So Connor, thank you for doing all. That's fine. On the happy news, the intern that was here at the last meeting, Lita, has also accepted a position, so they will be starting later in August.
Okay, cool. All right, member reports. Moving on. All right, member reports, public outreach and acknowledgement. Do you have anything on that? Yes.
The note that there's a link on there to New York Times article I asked Becky to put up.
So Rupert, I was, because you're on there as B, so I wanted to see if anyone else had public, and then I was gonna finish with you.
All right.
Is that okay? Does anyone have anything? Alan, yes,
Of course, right?
yes,
Regarding the letters that were sent out to the
Yes.
jurisdictions to try to get information about development, stuff like that. I'm assuming that nothing has been provided to FAMPO and thus ultimately not provided to the consultant regarding any of the developments.
The consultant has all known development plans. They've been in conversations with the.
So they have
commissions.
received-
They've been following up with even some of the. There is at least one like Stafford project that hasn't been in activity since like 2007, but to our knowledge, the consultants have everything.
So they have the site plans
Verified.
and so forth.
Good.
Yeah, because I had hoped, because, you know, when you go online to look at a particular project, you can see like the multitude of questions that that staff from Stafford has asked of the developer for. And it's obviously so specific, it's obviously that there are plans, and so I was just hoping that the consultant had been able to obtain them, so. But it would be nice for you guys to be able to have it so that we could all look at it. Okay, thank you.
cool. All right, anyone else have member reports?
Just when I say that, Allcam has filed a permit to start construction on the roadway off of 17 and Stafford, so there's gonna be some quarry trucks on 17.
Great, because we didn't have enough trucks on 17. Anyone, yes,
You guys doing a weird intersection out there on 3 and Orange Plank Road? Y'all familiar with it?
yeah, I saw something about that
Right.
today.
It's been in process, and I think it's imminent that they're gonna do.
Okay,
People finding out about it.
Where's that? Orange Plank and Route 3?
Orange Plank is pretty kind of far away. And VDOT said this lady got killed there a while ago, but they've had accidents there. So they're taking away left turns off of 3. Except they're preserving one left turn off of 3, but they're not letting you go from Orange Plank and take a left turn. They're doing things like this up and down 3 now, and access management, they're doing it with things called through cuts and other things. Gonna see more of it.
that, one of those was proposed in the smart scale, wasn't it? Yeah,
Up on Route 3, and I'm not sure why they were at smart scale, because I think you guys have other ways of doing that. But the one on Orange Plank, when you come out from Orange Plank, you hit 3, you wanna go east on 3. If you wanna go west to Wilderness, you have to go east on 3, hit the crossover, and U-turn and go back. And, there are folks that are thinking that's not very safe to do, but
is that like over by Battlefield Countries?
On out a little further.
A little further out?
Beyond Chancellorsville,
Okay.
beyond Lake Wilderness.
if VDOT got special money to build that intersection, supposedly because the federal highway has certain signs that they consider safe, that they've got data. So that particular intersection sign, federal highway thinks it's safer than what it is now if they redo it.
They've got a lot of those type of intersections. Where you have to go down and make the loop and all that.
It's like a Michigan left or like a New Jersey, jug hand, something like that.
I thought they recently put a traffic light.
Well, it's
been there a while.
long time.
Been there a while, but traffic goes so fast on 3 out there, it's like 65 plus. And so people that are queued up to make a left turn, it gets risky.
She turned left on a flashing left turn arrow in front of a dumpster. She didn't-
So they're gonna do that in the next
She
few
didn't have-
days.
she didn't have a green arrow, she had flashing.
Yeah, and there's some question whether she understood it, but whether people in general understand.
No, on 7.
The number of students I've seen cheating on driver's ed tests.
That many years ago, one was like the 4th car going through the light. Truck just ran right over. They put up rumble strips and nowhere to speak.
It seems to be the solution du jour, kinds of roads. If you remember, a few years ago, when we did 301 study. with that, it was an awful lot of those. You're not gonna be coming out of your
Yep.
driveway and crossing the interstate, I mean, 301.
Yeah, it's bound, yep.
And enough turn radius has to be built in the roads and everything to allow the trucks to do that. So that's the way to, seems to be the, through the school solution now for fixing those kind of issues. We're gonna see a lot of that.
Okay. Any further member reports? All right, Rupert, stage is yours. Thank you for your patience.
All right, some of you already know that for the past 50 years, I've been bad mouthing transportation policy, to not only the state, but the country. Because it's been giving us nothing but more sprawl, getting us deeper in debt. It's bad for our health, it's bad for our environment. And of course, in doing this, it's been obvious to me that a lot of people think that I'm, overly idealistic or just crazy. So I asked to have this article put on because I see now that finally some jurisdictions, some states are taking this to heart. They're realizing the only thing we're accomplishing by putting down all this asphalt is inducing more traffic. So they're doing a different tack. They're taking the approach of trying to get back to, transit-oriented and pedestrian-oriented developments. Anyway, I just want to let you know that this is now starting to reach, the levels that I've been looking for the last 50 years. And also, it might help you realize that maybe I'm not being too overly idealistic or too crazy. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Rupert.
It's a
It
It is a good.
is. I read it actually. It was really interesting.
I think it's most of us read it.
Yeah, no, I read it. I did the homework. Number 11, public comment. Do we have anyone from the public? No, okay. Future agenda items, anything there? Nope, okay. Do I have a motion? Oh,
Didn't we talk about the last meeting and when we have our next meeting, trying to have the consultant show?
yes, the consultants for the crossing study for future agenda item.
Okay. Yes, they will be making their rounds. We have at least one meeting with them in our contract. So
Minutes.
Yeah, no, I do remember that conversation. Yeah, we had talked about August meeting, because the idea being that we wanted those conversations to be able to bear fruit before, I think it was November that.
Well, sometime during.
Sometime in the
fall,
fall.
they're gonna have their.
yeah.
Yeah, so the VRE presentation for June, which we just did, and the VI presentation in August.
So can we make sure that that's on? Not technically my jurisdiction anymore.
The idea is to try to get our viewpoints and our recommendations into their heads. As early as possible, so as they're developing their final options, they can at least add up.
This is the consultant.
For the consultant regarding the bridge and the park, is what.
That would be, I don't think that since we'll have anything to present in. September might still be early. Trying to think with their timetable. So this month they'll be getting a lot of their environmental done. The traffic analysis won't be done until into July earliest, and they wouldn't even start giving their recommendations by early August. So,
Well, I think the idea behind this particular was that we wanted to make sure that that CTAC as a body had input into deliberations.
oh no, I agree,
Okay.
but they won't be making their recommendations at that time. That's my
When
thing.
are their
It's like,
recommendations?
they will start presenting their findings early September, I'm guessing. And we can maybe kind of pencil them in then. But ultimately, the trick is, it's ultimately going to be the meeting after they present to the policy committee.
I think the idea though was that
We were
we
trying to get them
meet them
before
before we wanted to be factored into their findings.
Because otherwise, the policy committee doesn't hear us, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
They don't hear us because then it's after the fact.
Right,
Yeah.
we wanted to provide a little direction for the consultant. We can provide information and our input.
I guess what we're asking is that we be allowed to provide some input that may impact the recommendations that they give to the policy committee.
Right.
Does that make sense? So if we met
Well-
with them in August, they could at least take our opinions as they are working through their recommendations for September.
That was partially done through March in the public comment period. So they won't be coming and making a lot of information available until after they've at least finished
So in
and
other
completed
words,
their
if you
analysis.
fill out the survey, then you didn't get your chance. I filled it
Uh,
out.
Like, I just want to think, the trick is when they bring out their findings, the policy committee always gets first cut. So I understand, but the comments, but that's the draft, so it comes to them and then there's gonna be a
So there
second
could
public
still be
comment.
changes after they are first, okay.
Absolutely, so.
Alright,
Isn't that somewhat dangerous that once it's, their information has been provided to the policy committee, that they've already pretty much started to make their minds up?
I would hope that they don't do it before they adopt the final draft. I
Well-
mean, even then, it's just like the east-west study, they say, go back and relook at this, look at this, what items do you miss? But basically, the consultants are gonna wrap up their analysis and then turn around and hand it over with their initial draft recommendations, as well as basically say, does this look right? Is there anything we've missed? And we have to have that built in. So, I mean, at this point in time, they're not going to be looking for recommendations because they're still doing like their traffic analysis. They haven't done that. They are getting to the point where they are not even, well, they're getting close to wrapping up a lot of their environmental land use, the real estate items, historic preservation stuff. They've done that analysis. We're still meeting or trying to meet and set up something with VDOT to make sure that their recommendations of what we have left in the scope of our work, that we have the budget and everything to make sure that they're gonna meet demands that we set out. Particularly, I mean, we did do the minor contract adjustment, but generally speaking, they are now we've taken everything, we've gotten all the data. They're locking themselves in the room and they'll come back out when they have a product that they can develop, so.
Okay. Can we try to make sure that we're getting them in September at least then?
September,
That's what it
is
is.
that all right? Sure. I will not be sharing that one, so. Yes,
And then to Rupert's point, correct me if I'm mistaken, if my memory is wrong, but Smart Scale, if I remember correctly, it used to put forth pedestrian and bike, right? Yes, they changed the rules. So the reality is, Rupert, many of us worked diligently, and I know Stafford did a number of them as well, to make our communities walkable and bike friendly through the Smart Scale, but Smart Scale allows us to. So, not sure why they took that section out of it, but I think if somebody wanted to advocate legislatures down at the state level to put that back in, that goes a long way to making our.
Well, the other thing is zoning. I mean, 1972, we had to put industrial over here and commercial over here and residential over there, right?
Yes, we
So
have.
now we gotta go back to planned development communities where you can live over top of then your building code, you couldn't live over top of your store anymore. Used to be, everybody lived over top of their
Yes.
store. You can't do it anymore because of the zoning laws.
Right.
That's what you gotta change. If you want a pedestrian friendly neighborhood, I'm all for it. I think they're cool. But the ordinances aren't there.
Takes more than that. I don't need-
Right, but our point is that there's a lot of hurdles, and it's not that any of one of us is opposed to it. I think overall, all of us would like to be in our vehicles less. The reality is, there are just so many hurdles, you have to pick one at a time and chip away at it until a change is made. And I'm a firm believer, from having served, one voice can make a difference. So, I mean, it really does happen, but you have to pick one thing and chip away at that one thing.
I feel like the first thing is to let people know that there is an option.
Yes,
Most people don't even know there's another way of doing business.
that's right. That's right.
All right,
Move for adjournment.
second, all right, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, get out of